Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 86. And this episode, we are going to talk about a subset of gaming that Matt and I have been sort of ignoring for the last entire run of this podcast, simply because we're not equipped to talk intelligently about it, and that's sports games. So we brought on the best expert we could happily find. So we are joined today by a friend of the podcast, musician, nerd par excellence, Greg Steiner. It's good to have you on.
Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm not so sure about best expert, but maybe most convenient, fan of.
You are my favorite. You are my favorite fan and expert of sports games.
There we go.
Yes.
When Geoff brought up the idea of first bringing Greg on, who I actually met Greg independent of Geoff many, many years ago in the ancient past, and only found out much later that we were all friends simultaneously through different avenues. But when we had been broaching the idea of talking about sports games, which we had been ignoring for a while, Geoff floated this idea of bringing Greg on because you do play a lot of sports games. And I think at the end of the day, this show is not so much about expertise as it is experience and just sharing our experiences. Yeah.
Passion.
I think passion goes a long way. So I think a good place to start is kind of where we are all coming from with sports games. I know for me personally, I played a lot more sports games when I was younger. I started on the Nintendo. I played a lot of Tecmo Bowl with my father, who wasn't good at video games back then, still isn't now. So, it was kind of a one-sided playing of that game, but we had fun. I played a lot of NFL Blitz in the PlayStation era and the Dreamcast era. To the point where I played so much NFL Blitz that when I then tried to play Madden in like the PS2 era, I tried to tackle someone after the play and I got a penalty. And I was like, what the hell? I do that all the time in the other game. I can powerbomb them in the other game. I don't understand. What's the problem?
Is this even football?
Right, exactly. But beyond that, like as years have gone on, I've played less and less sports games, and so my experience has kind of been dwindling. But I do have fond memories of the early days of like multiplayer sports games.
Yeah, I would say most of my sports gaming experience can be summed up as I was a little brother. We had a bunch of sports games on the NES. We had Bases Loaded 3 for baseball. We had 10-Yard Fight for football. We had actual like launch title black box soccer, American Gladiators, I don't know, a bunch of those things. And a lot of the two-player one-on-one kind of things, it was just playing sports games was an invitation to be frustrated and to lose. And I was built like a very classic scrawny model nerd. So real life sports also were similarly frustrating and disappointing. It's not that I don't like physical activity, but it was just, I don't know, developed a complex around it. By the time we had a PlayStation in the house, we had sports games, but a lot of them were my brother's. He was the one who had Game Day 97, Game Day 98. I then slid over to, playing Tony Hawk and racing games as far as sports stuff goes. But Greg, you've got a much deeper history with it.
Yeah, so I mean, in real life, like I'm a big fan of at least 3 of the classic 4 like big American sports. And kind of always have been. I grew up a sports fan from my dad and my stepdad, both big baseball fans, football fans. And because of that, it kind of was a really natural leap over and an interesting crossover between gaming and sports as a kid. Because as a kid, like, you enjoy watching the games if you're a sports fan, but you don't necessarily learn all the rules. And it's funny that you mentioned like NFL Blitz, because obviously that has a very specific rule set. But yeah. I learned a lot about how the sport was actually played and how to further enjoy my sports viewing from playing video games and like learning what actually goes into it. Like, okay, well, that wide receiver didn't just go and do that. There was a play that was written up that told him to do that while these other guys do this. So that way the quarterback would have the best, possible throwing route. So a lot of that strategic element which is one of the things I love most about sports as an adult, is stuff that I really picked up from playing sports games.
Very cool. That makes sense. Yeah, I remember as a kid getting offsides playing soccer on the NES so many times, I eventually had to learn what it meant.
I think one of the major reasons why I hate hockey so much in real life is because I was playing one of the old Wayne Gretzky games when I was a kid and just couldn't figure out how to stop getting icing penalties.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, it's funny for sports games for me also. I forgot to mention, like, the real crossover for me actually happened during the sports entertainment era. I played just about every wrestling game ever made from the, let's say, Super Nintendo era all the way through PS2. I think I fell off of wrestling during the PS3 era, and I'll watch wrestling occasionally now because I have a lot of friends who are really into it. And for a while, I DJ'd a wrestling themed burlesque show, which is a whole other animal. But like, I loved wrestling games, like to the point where, and I think this has come up on the podcast before, back in the days of VCRs and before wrestling games had like over the top intro with tons of entrance music and like it was all kind of still low key, like WCW versus NWO World Tour.
I was just about to bring that one up.
I would record the entrances and the matches on my VCR and put together my own pay-per-views based on the matches I would record from the N64. Because I would plug the N64 into my VCR and I'd be able to capture the footage way back before capture cards were even a thought. And like, I remember loving doing that, just in the same way that like when you growing up, I had wrestling toys, like me and my friends would make our own pay-per-views where we'd use his actual TV as the Titantron and like play the entrance music and stuff. And I really love doing that kind of thing. Customization in sports games is something that I've always been a fan of. Any sports game where you can create your own player, I love doing, because we've talked at length on a previous episode about creative characters, and like that kind of customization gets me more invested than anything else. I've watched sports over the years. Like, I'm a Mets fan by osmosis because I grew up in Staten Island and my father was, and it's kind of like a birthright. And then I'm a Giants fan because the Giants are better than the Jets and because my brother likes the Jets. So if I can do something to simultaneously piss him off and like football, I will do that. Also, I had a few favorite players on the Giants who are no longer there. I don't watch a ton of sports now because I'm a cord cutter and I don't have any of the networks and I don't have a regular cable box. Though I know you can watch a lot of that stuff online now. But I also, part of sports for me was the community, just like the gaming side of it. Playing with other people was the draw. Watching sports with other people was the draw. Sitting and doing it by myself is just less interesting to me for some reason. I've always considered it a community activity.
Yeah, and I can completely agree with you on a lot of those points. I know that for myself, the create-a player modes and like the career modes that you get in a lot of sports games have always been one of my absolute favorite things. And it's really unfortunate nowadays because while a lot of them will still have career modes, I feel like the best time for it was like the early to mid 2000s. In fact, I would say realistically, the most fun career mode I ever played was the early on NFL 2K for Dreamcast games. Because one thing that they did that was super, super interesting in the NFL 2K series was they started like taking a little bit outside of just what was playing football and made it what was living the life of a football player. And it's something that I feel was abandoned. Like Madden started to take it really on in like the PlayStation 3 era and then sort of abandoned it. But there were all sorts of cool things. Like as you would build your career and become better known, you would get larger contracts, which would let you buy upgrades to your hub, which was like a nice house. And in that hub, you can buy all kinds of like really nice big TVs and a foosball game, which you can then play foosball in your NFL 2K game. And pinball, you could play pinball in that game as well.
Okay, now I need to get it.
Yeah, right? So it was, and then on top of that, there were also things, and I might be mixing my games up here, but there were things where it was like, okay, if you got big enough, people would ask you to star in movies. And then you would be presented with like this little, 15 sentence script, which you'd have to like memorize. And then it would be like a back and forth sort of multiple choice question thing where you'd have to say the right words in order to get the best movie so you can earn more money. And it was just this really, really interesting concept that I absolutely wish they had gone further with, because I would love to see what you could do with something like that with today's technology and visuals on that.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it's not the most microtransaction friendly thing, and I think that's something we'll probably get into at some point during this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, the evolution of sports games, even from an outsider, because and we talked a bit about the esports side of stuff, but it's interesting how gaming has become a sport now, and games like Overwatch, which is a big one, and League of Legends and a bunch of others have now this whole kind of sports culture around those games, even though the games themselves are not inherently sports games. And then beyond that, it's grown even further beyond how people interact with these kinds of games and how these games mimic sports. Like you look at Rocket League, which I've only played a little bit of, but I like, which is this kind of fusion of car racing, soccer, and it's this amalgamation of sports and other things. And even games like Splatoon or those kind of versus squad-based games have a sports mentality, team versus team mentality. So the metaphor and the lines have blurred as technology has gotten better.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially in these quarantine times, we've running into a lot of interesting intersection between sports and gaming right now, because, most professional athletes are around our age. Many are much younger. So
this is truth.
So most of them grew up playing whatever sport that they love as video games as well. Yeah. So, early on, there was an ESPN thing where they had a bunch of really top NBA players that were playing NBA 2K on ESPN. And then later on, they did MLB The Show did one on Twitch where they had one player from every team play that team and have a tournament, because we can't have real sports. So that was the closest thing they could do. And I think it's something that will really raise the profile of Twitch gaming and things like that to an audience that maybe doesn't otherwise pay that much attention to it. I know that I have family members who are not gamers who were watching the NBA 2K tournament just because it was sports.
It was good. Yeah, you're right. It's good intersectionality. Whatever way you're bringing in people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's funny that you bring that up, because one of the things that always was fun to do with sports games growing up versus other games that even in the it's so impressive now, but even in the PS2 generation, when I would get a new wrestling game or a new basketball game, because I grew up watching a lot of basketball. Of all the sports that I actually was into growing up, I was a giant Chicago Bulls fan. I played basketball growing up because I have long arms and long legs, which means you can play basketball to some level or another. I was a really good rebounder. The rest, meh. But that was the sport that I shared the most with my father. And every time a new sports game came out, specifically basketball, that had better graphics, I would call my dad in to show him me playing the game. And he'd be like, wait, this is a game? Because it looks like the actual courtside, back and forth of a real basketball game. And we've gotten so much closer to that now than even back then. It's kind of astonishing. When graphics get good in, an action adventure game or a superhero game or whatever else, there's some suspension of disbelief, and there is this level of, this is fantasy, this isn't real. But when you play a sports game or a wrestling game in the current gen and see how realistic these human beings look, it's insane to me that we can capture that. During the PS5 reveal, they showed a trailer, I think, for the newest basketball 2K game, and showing sweat dripping on a human player has become the way to show that graphics are really insane. And it seems kind of goofy, but
we got good
it's
at
really
water.
Cool.
It used to be showing rivers in water. Now it's people water.
People water, yeah.
But it's liquids abound.
Yes.
But it's one of those things that, whether you like sports or not, you can't deny how impressive it is to see an actual basketball player on screen with pretty much their exact likeness and movement. Because, like, you know, back in the day, it was like 3 frames on a Super Nintendo would make a run cycle for a basketball game, and it was fine. You mostly played for the gameplay, not for how real it looked. But like now, it's really insane how impressive all of it looks, from the movement, the motion capture, the facial capture, all of that stuff.
And I think that really hits on a crux of a lot of things that I really wanted to get into today. Um, so first of all, yes, absolutely, what you're saying is correct. In that sports games, especially like the major sports, have always been one of the biggest technology pushers in video gaming, because especially early on, you know, like we were talking a little bit before the cast, you know, realistically, like the first game that was ever made was a sports game. It was Tennis for Two.
Yeah.
So just going from, and then you have things like, you know, Pong, and then getting into Tecmo Bowl and things of that nature. As technology grew, one of the biggest definers of what people were trying to do with gaming was make it, with sports gaming especially, was making it more and more realistic.
Yeah.
And to me, I feel like as that curve has gone up of realism, and the technology has improved to a point where it's very, very difficult to make the players look more realistic on a year-to-year basis at this point. You know, it requires a general technological leap of like a new console coming out, or, you know, maybe every 5 years, if you're playing your sports games on PC, that you'll see some kind of like a noticeable difference. Um, that drive to improve that realism that was very important to sports gamers early on has become almost more of a crutch in a lot of ways to the big sports franchises. We're talking now your NBA 2Ks, your Maddens, and things like that. To the point where I think it's become a little problematic. I mean, you know, we were talking a little bit earlier about games like NFL Blitz and, you know, NBA Street, Hot Shots Golf, things like that, that were a little bit more arcadey and just a little bit more fun focused, that took the general concept of sports and made them into games that were maybe more digestible by people who were not huge sports fans.
Yeah, like definitely some of my favorite sports times. It's like, yeah, playing yeah, we can have all the realism in the NBA we want, but I want to jump super high and set the hoop on fire. Boom shakalaka.
Exactly. You know, and I mean, one of the most impressively selling sports title in the history of gaming is Wii Sports, which is not designed for realism. And that's probably the sports game I've played the most of any sports game, you know, because that was the big thing when it came out. And even moving on beyond that, like we haven't even touched on, you know, Mario Kart and Mario Tennis and Mario Strikers. Like all of the Mario sports titles tend to even outsell like regular major sports titles because of the fact that Mario's on it, because it's kiddied down a bit, it's made a little simpler, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think you're really right, Greg. Like we've hit this point now where like the realism of the experience sometimes overtakes the gameplay loop and the fun of it. You know, the reason that Wii Bowling was fun in Wii Sports was not because it felt like real bowling, but because it was arcadey and really easy to get into and really easy to play.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, and those games are a lot of the reason why I got so into sports gaming, was because, you know, that couch experience of playing against friends, and, you know, you go to your friend's house, they have, you know, Hot Shots Golf, and you're not that good at it, so you beg your parents to pick it up for you so you can, you know, get better, and then go back to their house and go, oh yeah, let's play that game again.
90% of my fighting game purchases are under that reasoning.
Exactly. I mean, in a way, fighting games are sports games, you know?
They are, yeah, for sure.
Well, and that's kind of the thing here. Like, we're talking about all sorts of different sports, and it's like, all right, well, yeah, which, you know, Rocket League is technically a sports title, but then there's also esports, which is the sports skills for gaming, but it's like there's a weird sort of like wiggling back and forth here of what defines, and just the same as the streams that you were talking about, Greg, at the beginning of quarantine, is kind of a way of bringing in non-gamers into a gaming space or a gaming mindset. And, you know, the earliest games, a lot of them are adaptations of real life experiences. And first it was, let's just make it digital. Like, we've got the paddles moving to push the ball. And then it becomes a thing where we got creative, where we get our Mutant League games and you get Baseball 2020. And then, I think you're right. I before you started, I wanted to ask, like, are we getting those sort of like wild ideas now? The hyper reality of gaming can give us a realistic look of doing things just a little outside the bounds of reality.
So there are some more arcadey games. Our mutual friend Chris has recently gotten me into Blood Bowl, which is a football/rugby game set in the Warhammer universe. Which actually started as a game, as a tabletop game, and has since been digitized. And yeah, it's a lot of fun, but unfortunately, it's one of my biggest problems with sports gaming today is just that lack of originality. Like you said, one of my absolute favorite games, you mentioned it in passing just there, which was Super Baseball 2020.
Setting you up, buddy.
So just to get into this game for the vast majority of people who have probably never played it, it was a game that was played in Cyber Egg Stadium, was the name of the stadium, in which you were in the magical, far-off, futuristic world of 2020, in which baseball players all carried jetpacks, teleported onto and off of the field, played alongside robots that, if overworked, could blow up. There was a weird plexiglass sort of situation over the crowd, which allowed some of the crowd to be considered in play. It was just such an original take on a baseball game while still being a baseball game at the end of the day. Like, you still played 9 innings. There were still, strikes and, balls, and 3 strikes and, it's a strikeout. But it was them taking the core concepts of baseball and just taking the rest of it and going as out there as they possibly could. And those kind of things, there are some in like the indie space and things like that, but it's really missing from current mainstream gaming.
Yeah. There's some definite, like, you're right. The indie space has created some crazy stuff. Have either of you played What the Golf?
I've not, but I've heard about it.
Yes, it is a golf game created by, like, the idea of, I made a golf game. I don't know how golf works at all. I've never played golf. Is this golf? Do you throw the club like a javelin? Does the course just move around? Like, rules of reality don't exist from course to course. It's amazing.
I mean, it's interesting, like, you bring up the indie space, because there's also things outside of specifically sports games that we haven't touched on. 2 things that I'm thinking of. One, sports mini games within RPGs, one of the most famous being Blitzball within Final Fantasy X, which is a sports game. And then on top of that, I've been playing, though I haven't finished yet, Golf Story on the Switch, which is a golf RPG, which is not the first of its kind.
No, it's not.
The original Mario Golf and Mario Tennis on Game Boy Color were RPG games that happened to feature Mario and the cast if you got to a certain point. And it's just really interesting how developers now are trying to take sports and do them in a different way. I mean, the sequel to Golf Story is going to be Sports Story, which is supposed to come out this year but has no release date yet. This idea of leveling up to improve your game, and, like, this golf game that you're playing feels like golf, but there's more to it because it's this kind of over-the-top story with RPG elements, and it's in the same way that card games are often featured in a lot of RPGs. RPGs interaction with sports have always kind of gone hand in hand on some level, as whether it's a mini game or something else.
Yeah, absolutely. I was trying to remember what it was called, but I know that actually one of the earliest soccer games was actually a RPG, and there's things like Super Strikers, which is another that's like a tactics RPG soccer game.
Yeah, I feel like, honestly, while you're talking about it, Matt, like, soccer is the one where, like, I want soccer RPG. I want soccer JRPG. Yeah, I want that.
Well, I mean, my favorite all-time soccer game ever that I ever played that was a video game is, of course, the incredible Mega Man Soccer, which is by no means incredible at all. It's actually not a good game when you revisit it, but I played so much Mega Man Soccer when that game first came out because the idea of being able to play with my favorite Robot Masters and having these special moves to play soccer with was like mind-blowing to me, you know, and we've never gotten anything like that since in the Mega Man franchise, at least. And I think like character-based sports games just seem to make sense. Like we're on the precipice with Nintendo because Mario Kart, the most recent Mario Kart is barely Mario Kart anymore because Animal Crossing, Zelda, the Inklings, like so many other
Nintendo
characters
Kart.
are in it. Yeah, we're headed towards Nintendo Kart, I think. And on top of that, like I think doing a sports game that's the same way would be really cool. Like, what about the next Super Mario Strikers being Super Nintendo Strikers and having a ton of different Nintendo characters in it? Like, I think that would be a really cool evolution for like the kind of arcadey, mascot-based, sports game.
Yeah, definitely. And there was also sort of the flip side of that, where there were some games, especially in the mid '90s, where you had games that were just normal games that were fronted by professional athletes. Like 1995, oddly enough, had both Shaq Fu
Yes.
and Michael Jordan Chaos in the Windy City.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about the Michael Jordan game. That's right.
Oh, Jesus. It was a definite personality selling the game. I mean, after Mike Tyson showed how it's done to sell so many video games, we had a good decade, I would say, of slap a name on it.
I mean, we've had a lot of games where, like, there was the Ken Griffey Jr. baseball series, and there was a lot of different games that had a specific famous athlete. The extreme sports genre was definitely known for that. Like, there was Dave Mirra BMX, of course, Tony Hawk Pro Skater. But these were not sports games at all, with the exception of like the fact that Michael Jordan would fight using basketballs.
Yeah.
These were like Shaq Fu was a fighting game, like a Mortal Kombat-ish fighting game. And Michael Jordan, the Castle Windy City game was more of like an adventure game, like an action adventure game. And people just in 1995 decided that was the thing to do, and then stopped immediately.
I think a little bit of that, like. Again. Yeah, I think a little bit of that Mortal Kombat digitization also, like, we caught there was a fever. Everyone kind of was sick at the same time.
There was a recent Shaq Fu reboot.
There was. It was a Kickstarted game. Shaq did VO on it. He was the executive producer of it, and it was a beat 'em up instead of a fighting game.
But you know what? Good on him. Good for him.
Yeah, sure. Why not? I'm not going to judge. If people want to play a game where you beat other folks up as Shaq, go for it. Why not? I think it's really interesting the variety of options we have now for sports games. And like, I've thought about going back and playing some sports games. I think for me, the problem is like, I've been really deep in story-driven gaming, and, there are career modes, but like you said, Greg, career modes aren't quite what they used to be. And a lot of the focus of a lot of these competitive games is just the competition, the versus stuff, which is fine, but I'm not really a competitive gamer. I like co-op. I like, if I play online, I like there to be some sense of silliness, which is why like I've liked games like Splatoon. Because if you get mad at a game of Splatoon, which is over in 2 minutes, it's like, why are you even playing that game? Like, you're missing the point. But like, I've played Overwatch a lot, mind you, years after it came out, and I liked it. But the competitive scene was so competitive. I was like, this just isn't fun anymore. And like, everyone's heard tale of League of Legends being unwelcome for new players. People, that community is so rampant with like misogynists and racists and people saying shitty stuff. And it's a bummer because, some of those games would be a lot more fun if the competitive side wasn't so toxic. But, it kind of is what it is right now. While the players can choose to make it change, it's really up to the community managers and the companies themselves to manage that, and a lot of them have been kind of hands off.
Well, and I think it's important for gamers to start demanding better in a lot of ways.
For sure.
Like, I think that one of the biggest issues when it comes to sports gaming and why it's gone down such a specific rabbit hole of only in terms of major releases only trying to satisfy a certain type of gamer is the stigmatism that's been brought on to the idea of being a sports gamer.
Yeah.
And I think that that goes both ways because as that stigmatism that stigma grows, what you end up with is there's not enough of the core gamers who are, experiencing the entire landscape of what gaming has to offer to try to rally against some of the more abusive practices and some of those, you know, kind of difficult online communities that can spring up in those kind of games, and end up making them less fun for everyone, including a lot of people who are really into core sports games. Like as much as I love sports games, I only bought NBA 2K this year. That's the only sports game I bought, and that was only because I'm a Nets fan. Like I'm the one Nets fan, and we had a really good off season this year, and I wanted the roster update. I played a little bit online, and other than that, I just stuck to my single player career mode, my single player you know uh, franchise mode, and didn't really engage with it beyond that. And unfortunately, because of how stigmatized sports gaming is and how few core gamers get into the experience, we really do find that a lot of the worst practices in gaming in terms of microtransactions and things like that do come from those major sports releases.
It's true.
Um,
Yeah.
I personally would really, really support if there was one of those major games decided to take the radical leap of not doing um, full releases every year. Give me a game that is like a 4 or 5 year game. Every year you can release a $20 roster update that lets you keep your roster updates for the full year.
Mm-hmm.
You can do a lot of those kind of things, and then every 4 or 5 years, give me a completely new, better experience.
Yeah,
Don't
basically
tell
have an annual
me
subscription.
exactly. Don't tell me that. Oh yeah, we added 15 new crossovers in this basketball game, and made Sweat look a little bit better. Aren't you excited?
$60.
Here, give me my $60. Especially if you're going to have games the way they are now, where there's so much wrapped up in that microtransaction world of the my team experience, which in a way can be really fun. I'm a CCG player. Buying packs, getting better cards, upgrading your roster, things like that. It can be really fun. And as much as I don't love microtransactions, I can understand it to a certain extent. I mean, they have to pay for these enormous player association and league licenses and things like that.
Yeah.
So I can understand it to an extent, especially when that gameplay's fun. But don't make me go and try to, spend hundreds of dollars to create this my team roster, and then tell me next year that now I have to do it all again.
Right. And if they're going to be updating the games in such a monumentally minuscule way, because they have to create a whole new game to justify the full game purchase, whatever it is, those microtransactions are also paying for the logarithmically growing teams of as far as the company goes, not just the sports teams, but the teams of people that make the games.
Mm-hmm.
And if you make the environment one that only that exists on a longer time scale rather than annually, for 4 or 5 years at a time, that also removes the need for it to be such a drip service, it removes justifications for charging so much so frequently.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, in today's situation technologically, there's no reason for it. When we were younger, you had to get a full new game to get the roster update. It was the only way. There was no, digital connectivity. If you wanted to play with all the teams the way they are right now, the only way to do it was to buy the new game.
Yeah,
Now that's
exactly.
just not the case. And sports gamers at large are just trained to expect it. But
Yeah.
I feel like if gamers start demanding better, if we start um, going out and saying, I want, I will pay for a better career mode. I will pay for, um, willing to pay for the roster update. Not quite what I'd pay for a full release, but willing to support that type of a business structure. I think that we could find ourselves in a much better place in terms of sports gaming. And, also, like we said before, go out and support that indie market when it comes to actually who are producing those more wacky out there ideas like Golf Story. And, we don't need to be two separate communities like we are so often when it comes to core gamers and sports gamers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is that gaming, it all stems back to the casual gamer versus the hardcore gamer conversation, which is a load of nonsense.
And this is and the sports is an entirely new subset within that.
Right. But it's this idea that just because you play one kind of game means you're not an actual gamer is the dumbest conversation we've ever had in the history of gaming. It's like, if you play video games, you're a gamer. I mean, I'm on and off on the term gamer as a whole, because like, you don't call someone who reads books a reader. You don't call someone who listens to music a listener, like in the same way that we put weight on the word gamer. And so that drives me nuts on its own. Also, part of the problem with the bigger picture is major publishers like EA is the most famous one, who is responsible for a ton of sports games. They like to nickel and dime everybody. It's to the point where the new Crash Bandicoot, the new Crash Bandicoot racing game, when they re-released it, like the Crash Bandicoot trilogy, they nickel and dimed people for like these packs to get racers and get carts and get cosmetics, and like it felt really insincere to the spirit of that game, in the same way that I feel like a lot of these here's a brand new $60 game just so you can get a roster update, is also inauthentic to what I think sports gamers really want, which is just an easy way to update their roster. Look, we're starting to see the shift a little bit in Pokemon. Usually it would be main Pokemon game comes out, then a year later, remastered version of that game comes out as like a third option. So like, you had the primary two, and then a third one comes out that incorporates new stuff and re-releases that game. They didn't do that this time around. We got 2 brand new DLCs, one for each game, that is in place of that whole new Pokemon release that's not really a new game. And like, some Pokemon gamers are a little much, I'll say, a little overreactive in the case of the most recent reveal of a Pokemon MOBA, which I am actually, in fact, excited for. I think looks very cool. But the idea that we've come to this expectation of getting a Pokemon game every year, when maybe that's not the best course of action. DLC and longer development cycles means better games less frequently. But also, it's not like there's a shortage of games out there. And I feel like with sports games too, if you have a really good sports game, you can play that for a long period of time and enjoy that game, and then just pay for a roster update versus, having to get that new game every year. I don't think it's necessary. We don't need a new Assassin's Creed every year. We don't need a new sports game every year. We don't need a new Call of Duty every year. We don't need a new Pokemon every year. Like, there's enough to play in the world that, and there's enough content in these games that I just don't think yearly releases are the answer. I think longer development cycles with like smaller DLCs and updates is the future of gaming to sustain this model to keep people engaged.
Yeah, and I think it's super important for us to realize as gamers like how much power we have as consumers.
For sure.
As much as we look at EA and 2K Sports and all those things as these monolithic, unbreakable, power structures in gaming, we look at what we did as gamers in terms of the extreme monetization in Battlefront, and how much uproar we caused on that, and how, in a linear sense, I feel like that brought us a game like Jedi Fallen Order, which, now we're getting a little bit out of the realm of sports games here, but, I feel like we can do the same sort of thing for sports gaming and find ourselves in just a much better position moving forward in getting something that everyone can enjoy, something that's less abusive to its own audience. Um, and I think that that's super, super important to get back to having those kinds of different sports games, because I feel like if we, especially nowadays, one of the core issues is that the, MLB, NFL, NBA, all of them, their players, at the league themselves and the player associations, both independently license out, and sometimes they'll do as what happened with the NFL with Madden. This is the reason why the 2K football games went away, is they started buying in exclusive licensing.
Yeah.
So in those exclusive licenses, you made it so, well, now there's no competition. We have no reason to improve ourselves. Um, so it made it so that annualized release schedule was really all they had to do. They put the same game out with a slightly different coat of paint, a new person on the box, and that's all they had to do. You know, having those games where maybe, okay, now we only need to put one out every 5 years. What can we do in the interim? Maybe we put out a new NBA Street game. We have the licenses, we have the players. Here's an entirely different way to interact with the concept of an NBA game that's a little bit more arcadey, hits a different audience. And, well, we're already paying for the license. We have a lot more of our development schedule free. Let's do that. And just it could give us back a lot of those other arcadey games and different ways to experience the sport, like we were talking about earlier.
That's very true. And something interesting that kind of while we're all talking about this is and to kind of bring the Battlefront argument into sports gaming a little bit, you mentioned, Greg, that like the best career mode you played was back on the Dreamcast, which was at the like very beginning of online console gaming. It had a 56K modem built in, but it was a fucking 56K modem. Like, we're not going to have a robust... Look, Phantasy Star Online, fine, whatever. However, that was right around when it started being a thing of like, oh, we can put a modem in our PS2, PS3, and that from then on, online gaming was assumed. And so that was being built and built on and built on. And so single player experiences withered on the vine a little bit. But with that push, yeah, we can hopefully get a little bit of, if you want to update your roster, you can't do online unless you have an up-to-date roster just because of reasons. So those who want to continue to buy into that model, but then there is that single-player development.
Mm-hmm. And that's another thing. Like, you could sell that as a DLC every year as well. You can do an updated roster, an updated, single-player story mode. And use those as ways they can still monetize. Like, I'm not against giving companies money for great games.
Right.
At the end of the day, like, I want the game. You need the money to make the game. I will give you the money so that you can make me the game that I want to play.
Yes, the spirit of the exchange is good. We like the spirit of this exchange. Let's just figure out the logistics here, because if we just keep assuming, there's going to be a lot of asses.
Well, yeah, I mean,
exactly.
One of the biggest like tragedies of sports gaming and sports adjacent gaming in the recent years, maybe tragedy is overselling it, but like the WWE 2K series, the last few games have been a complete train wreck nightmare, launched with tons of bugs, unplayable features. And like, when you do that, you show to the consumer, you don't care about the game. You just want our money. And like, I think like that stems back to the pressure of a yearly release. I feel like if we leaned into what you're suggesting, Greg, and had, one game every 5 years, but then added tweaks, we wouldn't have gotten WWE 2K18 or whatever. Like it would have been better because they would have taken more time in the development and waited to release it maybe in 2020 or 2021. But because they felt this need to get a game out every year, bugs or not, they launched it, and then it became unplayable. Even after patches, it still was mostly unplayable. And it's disappointing because at the end of the day, I want good games so people can enjoy them. I don't think the yearly release for sports games is the future to sustain the audience. And also for me, like, if I could buy a Madden game that I was going to be able to play for 5 years, I might be more inclined to give it a shot. But with sports games, for me personally, if there's going to be a new one every year and I have to drop $60 every year, I don't know that I want to buy one that I'm going to play for 6 months and then never touch again.
And it instantly has no resale value.
Correct. You know, old RPGs have a reason to return to them because they are a unique experience unlike anything else. But most sports games are iterated on, and there's no real reason to go, unless it's an arcadey game like we were talking about before, like the old Nintendo games or the Mario sports games. If it's a realistic sports game that it is iterative, there's no reason to go back to the old ones because you want the updated roster, you want the updated mechanics, you want the updated graphics, and it's kind of a different thing. And I think,
and that's kind of getting into the sweat and the graphics idea. We're focusing on the wrong aspect of the sports game experience.
Right. It should be about the mechanics of the game, how it plays, and what's fun about it. And you don't need to update that every year, I don't think.
I completely agree.
Yeah. I think that it would make sports games more approachable. Like, I think the reason that Wii Sports sold so well, besides being a pack-in title for the Wii, is because it was approachable. You could pick it up, and within minutes, you understand how it works, and you can play it. And I think if we had sports games that gave you more time to engage with them and learn the mechanics and get better at it and play it more, you would have a larger audience. I mean, it's why Overwatch has sustained an audience. It's why Rocket League has sustained an audience, because we're only now just talking about Overwatch 2. There's been no word on a second Rocket League. Like, it's this idea that you sit with a game long enough, people will join in on it. If you give them the time to engage. But if you're just, a part of the reason I dropped the Assassin's Creed series, besides the fact that I got bored with it, is because I couldn't keep up. Every year, a new game. And they're all like 60, 70, 80-hour games. I don't have that kind of time to play that game every year, especially when it doesn't change that much.
Well, and it's interesting, like, talking about stuff like Overwatch or any of these titles or League of Legends, the ones that have an evolving meta in much the same way that sports does, and you change up the roster. The thing of, like, it's not that we dislike its dynamic nature. Games are dynamic and we discover new things within them, but also your Mario Karts and Overwatch and other ones that have clear personality, clear delineation from choice to choice. And whether it's a team or a single avatar that you are controlling, you kind of can get to know at a glance who and what it is and how you can go about playing it and how it suits you and your play style. And that's where a lot of those smaller but still major sports titles of the Super NES era, the 16-bit rather, and even a little bit into PS1, we are in a wonderful era where we can make things so complicated and minutia and stat-based, and we can translate real-life stats so well into a digital landscape. And I don't know... This is a statement without a thesis. I'm just pointing these things out and just kind of getting to that idea of where we can make strong choices for teams or for players or for things within a sports gaming experience, bringing in the same way that having a true-to-life roster in a sports title can bring in real-life sports fans. Having those clear, gamifiable choices in your sports game bring in the non-sports, the video game players that are the equivalent of, I listen to everything but country and metal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, these sports have been around and as popular as they are forever because they're fun. They're fun to watch. They're fun to engage with. It's fun to be a fan of a team. And just like it's fun to be a fan of a Overwatch team, it's fun to be a fan of a baseball team. It's fun to be a fan of a football team. It's enjoyable. And, sports games deliver on a very specific fantasy that most games don't really touch on normally. That idea of why is a create a player a mode and a career mode so fun? It's, well, what if I was a professional baseball player? What if I was a soccer player? What if I was a racer? All of these games deliver on that type of a fantasy, which is something that you really can bring into the real world conceptually in a way that you can't with a lot of other games. What if I was a Jedi is a very, very different question.
It
you know?
is.
So
but I do remember when we were in college and we did like so much Create a Wrestler, and then we made me once, and I can't remember which specific wrestling game it was, and it was the funniest goddamn thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's a blast to do, and it's all about trying to find new and interesting ways to deliver on those experiences.
For sure.
What all that we want predominantly as gamers is a fun way to interact with our medium, and there's a lot of different ways to do it, and I'm not disparaging people that do want to go and play my team. Like, they should absolutely have that ability to do so, but at the same time I want to fight for them to be able to do it in a more ethical way. one that they're not being taken advantage of so much. And I think that in so long as a lot of gamers just look at people that do that as others, we're dragging the whole medium down.
Yeah,
I think you're right.
I agree completely. Yeah, I think that
it's a hard bias to break.
Right. And I think, we have take actions as gamers that we feel are important to us. Speaking with your wallet, as you mentioned, like I've said many times on this podcast, I've not spent a dime on Red Dead Redemption 2 because of the crunch that was involved, the open mocking of that crunch by the heads of the studio, and I've still not spent a dime on it. That said, I don't fault anyone who did buy it and love that game. I just decided to speak with my wallet and not buy that game. Now, that said, I want to get The Last of Us 2. I haven't bought it yet. That also experienced crunch in a very similar way. So, like, you have to pick your battles. You can't have a blanket moral code. It's harder. Like decisions in life, it's more nuanced than that. But I think until we start standing up and putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to the conditions of how games are made, how games are sold, and how games are marketed, there won't be any change. And you cited before, Greg, we have made some changes. And I think it's important to remember, not just with sports games, but with any game, if you want to see an improvement in that genre, that field, that style, you have to be vocal about it. You have to speak up, and you have to talk with your dollars ultimately, because we live in a capitalist society, and that's just how gaming works right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And with sports kind of currently being on the back burner, we'll see what that does for sports games in the future.
That's for sure. I think something that we haven't done in a while on the show that I think would be fun to do, mostly because I also don't know if Geoff will even have an answer, but maybe each of us mention our favorite sports game. And I can start because it's very easy for me. The sports game I played the most of was WrestleMania 2000 on the N64. It was I believe the first of the two N64 WWF games. It had entrances, it had Create a Wrestler, sort of, and it had some of my favorite gameplay mechanics. The grapple system in the N64 wrestling games, I still say, is one of the best wrestling systems because it was so easy to understand and still difficult to master. So I spent so much time playing that game, creating my own characters, setting up pay-per-views, tournaments. Easily, hands down, one of my favorite sports or sports adjacent games that I've ever played.
Is Pokemon a sports game?
No.
You fight in arenas. There's gyms. I know. Off the top of my head, probably, if not my absolute favorite, one of my tops is Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2.
I mean, that's a good one.
It's a good one. I'm a punk ska kid. I love the soundtrack. It's a game that I put a lot of time, a lot of fun. It's a game I still go back to and play.
Manuals all day, every day.
Manuals all day, every day. First Pro Skater, great, wonderful. Like I play it. It's great. Manuals. When you can string together a combo the whole time, the first time you do it, you feel unstoppable. and you spend the rest of your life trying to chase that high again, but nothing will come as close. And then you look at the shambles of your life.
All right, Geoff.
And the soundtrack has literally changed my life.
Yes.
Oh yeah, same. Absolutely. The reason I
Yes.
like half the music I like is because of that soundtrack. Easily.
And even some of the later ones, like I remember when
The other one, yeah.
Tony Hawk Underground came out, being introduced to bands like Dilated Peoples and Bus Driver, who were just two West
Bus
Coast like
Driver.
indie hip hop guys who
Yeah.
I absolutely fell in love with, and now I play in, shockingly enough, a ska punk hip hop band. It's almost like
Shocking.
I am the the amalgamation of all of the Tony Hawk's Pro Skater soundtracks.
And you know what? That's you're a better man than us.
That is
Although, on the
demonstrably
fun note-
false.
Nah. The fun thing is, though, as much as the Tony Hawk series has done wonderful stuff, if you really want to look up some of the darker side of what we've been talking about and just some game design stupid things in general, look up the story of Tony Hawk Pro Skater 5 and just get mad. I will spoil nothing. Just look it up.
Going back to favorite sports games, I have to cheat here. I was gonna say 3, but you said Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, so now I can trim it down to a nice 2. We mentioned earlier Super Baseball 2020. It is one of the more out there sports games I've ever played. It is such a formative memory of my gaming childhood that I have to give that a shout out. But right now, the game that I'm actually playing most is Outside the Park Baseball. I have probably 400 hours pumped into that over the course of the last 3 or 4 games of it.
Nice.
And it delivers again. We were talking earlier about how a lot of these sports games, one of the best things about it is how they can deliver on such a real fantasy. And for me, my biggest fantasy is the Mets were well run. And this is a game in which you are, on a very real sense, just taking over a baseball team. You're running every level of the minor leagues. You are scouting, developing players and prospects, internationally scouting. You are looking at spreadsheets of numbers. You never swing a bat in this game. There is, in the newest one, there is a home run derby mode where you can hit spacebar at the right time to actually participate in the home run derby. That is the closest you actually get to simulating baseball. Other than that, is entirely a sports management simulator. There's also a hockey, I think it's Hockey Manager, and there's a Football Manager game. I'm not sure if those are the correct names of them, but they're easy enough to look up, which are very, very similar. And if you are really a nerd about sports stats and getting into the nitty gritty of what it actually feels like to run a team with a budget and, actually make your terrible favorite team good, highly recommend.
Yeah, the management simulator genre is like real and thriving. And I imagine for a lot of people that aren't necessarily like, I don't like playing sports, but do you like playing nitty-gritty JRPGs? Are you into the Disgaea series? You might just want to run a sports team. Here's your way in. Enjoy.
Yeah, I would love for that game to introduce some more RPG-like elements, like there's a little bit in terms of like injuries, and unfortunately, so earlier games didn't have the license and were allowed to use like PEDs. But once OOTP got the MLB license, part of the deal with that was, well, none of our players can be caught using PEDs.
Right.
But there's like all kinds of weird injuries, and you can tell that they're not using the best system to simulate it, because you'll have like, this person was in a car that got hit by a train. They're out for 3 days.
Damn.
Yeah.
Are they Wolverine?
The train wasn't moving.
Yeah. But yeah,
It's a toy train.
But I would definitely love to have even more like RPG-ish elements in that, where, say this player had a bad fight with his wife and now doesn't, is going to have a bad game for the next 5 games. But yeah, I mean, it just, again, delivers on the fantasy in a very different way. And, of course, every game, MLB The Show has its franchise mode, but This just is entirely focused on that franchise builder. You can even I'm in an online league which is entirely user generated teams, computer generated players, and it is an absolute blast because it's like we built our own alternate world version of the MLB.
Nice. Yeah. Like I think of older games like Fire Pro Wrestling and those ones where they had to do the lawyer friendly versions of all this stuff. And I imagine if you take like more modern ideas, just sort of throw in a little bit of baseball manga sensibility into it, I think it'll take you very far.
I would kill for a King of Diamond JRPG.
Right.
There you go.
There you go.
Amazing.
This can happen somehow.
We'll dream it into reality.
Again, speak with your dollars.
Greg, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with us today, bringing your vast sports knowledge to our humble little show. It's been a pleasure having you on.
It's been a blast, guys. Thank you so much for having me. Can I plug something?
Yes, absolutely.
Please plug away.
All right. I just wanted to, as I mentioned earlier, I am in a band. If you would like to check out Love is a Fist, loveisafist.com, bandcamp.com/Love is a Fist. We have new releases coming out. We actually just released a music video pretty recently. You can find it on YouTube, find it on Facebook, wherever you want. And, if you're interested in ska, hip hop, punk rock, jazz, funk, pretty much any genre, definitely, give it a check. Give it a check out.
It's really good stuff.
Yeah, highly recommend.
It's fantastic. And no, again, Greg, thank you so much. I mean, we didn't even get into like completely made up sports and video games. We touched on it with Blitzball. I think that needs to get talked about. Whenever we get around to talking about card games and video games, Greg, I think we'll need to do a big thing with that.
I think we also need a day on extreme sports games so we could talk more about the excellently named A Reckless Disregard for Gravity.
Yes. There's so much to do. Like, yeah, to devote one episode to sports is hubris. So this is scratching the surface. We'll come back to this later. But in the meantime, listeners, what are some of your favorite sports games? What is your history with it? Have you always avoided it? Have you always been part of it? Where did you come in and fall out? What do you want to see in future sports titles? What are some of your favorite indie sports titles? We want to hear about all of it. Let us know on our Twitter. You can come on to the Certain POV Discord and let us know. And while you're there, also check out some of the other great Certain POV podcasts that we have on our network. A wonderful cornucopia of nerdery and media of all sorts.
Yes, and please share your thoughts with us. Again, you can go to there's a permanent invite link to our Discord server at certainpov.com. Also, the usual rigmarole, like, subscribe, share. If you really enjoy the podcast and you think one friend of yours might like this gaming podcast, please share it with them. We appreciate our entire community and all the folks who are already sharing all the things that we do. We love doing it, and thank you for being a part of this show.
Yeah, and if there's a genre that we have been ignoring, I mean, we didn't ignore sports out of malice. We just didn't think about it for a while. Let us know, please.
Yes, please.
Join the conversation. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am at AK Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey, Nerferders. My name is Case Aiken, and for over 2 years, I've hosted my show, Another Pass, where I sit down with interesting guests to talk about movies that we find fascinating but flawed. Good movies, bad movies, doesn't matter. We find ways that they could have been improved. So if you ever thought that a sequel dropped the ball by forgetting about a plotline, that an epic could have been saved by introducing the director to an editor, or that a comedy didn't work hard enough to have some substance behind the laughs, then check out Another Pass podcast at certainpov.com or wherever you get your podcasts.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.